Wonderful. Okay, wonderful. We will set aside 10 minutes for your submission, so I'll hand over to you to get underway.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. My submission today specifically relates to Section 9, 11 and 15 of the Act and the Maritime Border Order, which has been created under these sections. I'm a COVID unemployed foreign-going sea captain. I'm a master mariner with 44 years of seagoing experience. I've spent the last 22 years of my seagoing career in a fly-out, fly-in, fly-out mode from New Zealand, working anywhere in Australasia and the Persian Gulf regions. I worked on the marine salvage 10 years ago, and I wrote a book on my experiences there. I've got unmatched experience in the marine side of the oil and gas industry, and I'm likely one of the most diversely experienced seafarers currently licensed by Maritime New Zealand. I represent a loosely affiliated group of some 400 plus similarly marooned New Zealand seafarers who've been likewise afflicted with COVID-induced unemployment. The majority of these seafarers are not working overseas by choice. It's a necessity. The harsh reality of life is that there's simply no equivalent jobs here in New Zealand available to us. We all come from diverse marine backgrounds, working on specialist offshore vessels in the oil and gas industry, dive support vessels, oil rigs, seismic survey ships, subsea cable repair ships, fishing vessels, volunteers on Mercy hospital ships, and a significant amount on sailing vessels and super yachts. These seafarers have been either forcibly unemployed or not re-employed due to their inability to commit to a scheduled roster, or due to additional costs incurred by their overseas employer due to MIQ and the uncertainty surrounding the international repatriation of Kiwis, or simply choosing to quit their fly-in, fly-out seafaring jobs due to the uncertainty of when they might next be able to return to New Zealand, or simply being forced to remain overseas to work and subsequently enduring significant mental health issues. So that encompasses the package of the people that I represent, and I can't give you percentages on who fits into which category. There's just not enough time. We're not made unemployed by COVID as such, rather being made unemployed by the operation of the MIQ system. It's been perpetuated by an oversight in the original draft of the COVID-19 public health response legislation. I certainly hope it was an oversight and it wasn't active discrimination. I am aware that some seafarers and others non-seafaring have made formal complaints to the Human Rights Commission on that very basis, that they've been actively discriminated against because of their nationality, not just by their employers from overseas, but also by the New Zealand government itself. So it's quite a significant depth of bitterness and grievance held against the government due to the sheer injustice that seafarers find themselves in. The oversight was created due to an anomaly within the COVID-19 public health response, the Maritime Border Order, which is linked to the Act that we're discussing now. It makes continued employment unviable for overseas employers and New Zealand domiciled seafarers who work overseas on a routine fly-in, fly-out basis, such as what I used to do. Now, sections 26, 27 and 28 of the COVID-19 Maritime Border Order are referred to as the Maritime Allocation within the MIQ system. This maritime allocation allows for the facilitation of crew changes on international trading merchant vessels, ships that you see, if you look out your window, you see them every day going in and out of port. This maritime allocation in turn keeps the mechanisms of international trade flowing freely, from which New Zealand obviously benefits. Now, Section 26 of the Maritime Border Order refers to seafarers who sign off their international trading vessels in a New Zealand port and they're due for repatriation to their home country once they've finished their term of their employment contract. Sections 27 and 28 of that border order refer to seafarers who arrive in New Zealand by air for the specific purpose of joining a ship. The seaman then flies into the country, joins a ship, then departs on that ship on its scheduled trading route. The anomaly contained within Section 28 of that order is that there's no reference to New Zealand domiciled seafarers who work overseas, nor any legislative mechanism by which they can return to New Zealand once they've completed their fixed term of their employment contract. It's an unintended oversight which perpetuates an unfairness to the point of discrimination against New Zealand nationals on the basis of their nationality. Take, for example, we have recently had Russian, Lithuanian, and Filipino seafarers. They're able to enter this country. They join their ship, complete their tour of duty, might be 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. They arrive back in New Zealand, sign off their vessel in New Zealand, then depart New Zealand, fly home, and then they can return to New Zealand 3 months later and repeat that roster. So non-tax-paying foreign seafarers have been legislated, and this legislation, a priority access lane into MIQ to allow them to continue their trade, whereas New Zealand domiciled tax-paying international seafarers are not given that same right. It's purely because of an oversight. I suspect, I certainly hope it's an oversight. There's something that would not have been legislated for directly. So New Zealand seafarers have been discriminated against by legislation that was enacted by its own government, being denied that routine access to return to their own country. Probably heard of Andrew Milne, the head of MBIE. He's been quoted as saying that creating a specific allocation of rooms for New Zealand seafarers to return is not practical. Yet at the behest of Minister Farfoy, that same group, MBIE, they created a bunk space for 500 Russian and Ukrainian seafarers early on in the pandemic. That in itself proves that it is possible to, it's logistically possible to cater for seafarers coming into the country. Another MBIE manager wrote in a briefing to Minister Judkins that specific seafarer allocation could be designed and implemented. So they know that it's there, and I've worked with people to try and put this together, but this option was unfathomably rejected by Minister Judkins, and we don't understand why. We're not asking for an MIQ waiver. That was granted to Air New Zealand staff who undertake a similar fly-in, fly-out role as I used to do. In summary, hold on, sorry, I missed a piece there. We're not asking for a creation of a loophole. We're not trying to buy a stairway to heaven, and we're not asking for special privileges like some sports people with an overinflated sense of self-importance. We're just asking for a fair go. In summary, we're simply asking that an unjust clerical oversight contained within the original legislation of the COVID-19 Maritime Border Order be rectified by the insertion of a simple amendment to include a mechanism by which New Zealand seafarers who sign off their vessels at an overseas port be granted the same right of access. I'm going to quote section 28 of the order, same right of access as other crew members who arrive in New Zealand by air to a place of isolation or quarantine for the purpose of the crew member completing their period of isolation or quarantine as required by clause 23. It's a simple insertion of 2 or 3 lines that I'm hoping was just an oversight, and I can't understand why it hasn't been rectified by now. So that there's an awful lot of I know there's New Zealanders overseas that are bleeding emotionally to get back into the country. But the fact that foreign seafarers have a priority lane to get into and out of New Zealand, whereas New Zealand seafarers don't have access to that same priority lane, is an injustice that wasn't really, it just wasn't thought about properly when the legislation was first drafted. It's just been lost in space.
Thanks, Kevin. We have a question from Penny. We have a question from Penny Simmons, actually, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for your very clear explanation of what looks like an anomaly or an oversight. I put my hand up partway through and you answered some of my question about what consultation you'd had and had you put any option up that would rectify this. So you've answered that component of it, thank you. But what sort of numbers would we be talking about at any one time that might be needing to be coming in and out of the country? You said you represented about 400 people, but presumably they wouldn't be all coming in and out at one time.
Absolutely not. No, they would be coming in probably, this is just a guess figure, possibly one a day, two a day at max, so that some people, and they could plan ahead in that respect, so it wouldn't be a surprise, oh, I'm here now. We have a roster schedule, like you have on a calendar roster, I'm due off on this day, and 3 months later or 6 weeks later, or I'm due. So it can very easily plan ahead, and it wouldn't be more than, the maritime allocation as it currently exists is 60 hotel rooms, 60 bunk spaces. If we could have 20 of those bunk spaces allocated over a fortnight period, in essence, we're looking at 1 to 2 per day. That's all we would be looking at.
Thank you, Kevin. So essentially, you've given the lines that would amend the bill appropriately to allow this to happen, and you're saying it's only about 20 that would need to be allocated. So thank you for clarifying that.
20 per fortnight, that is, yes.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, we are at time, but thank you very much, Kevin, for that submission, and appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your taking time to hear me too.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so committee, we're now moving to a scheduled break, and we'll see everybody back at 11:10. Thank you very much.